Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Really happy to get this started. Today let's start with video number 1, which will be a quick Q&A. So I have a question from my good friend Ben, and he's wondering, how do I determine what Q settings to use for different scenarios when EQing? This is a very simple question, yet has some complexities to it. The simple answer is I use narrow Q settings to reduce mostly and broad Q settings to boost. But there's more depth to it. I use narrow Q settings when I hear small issues, such as small frequencies sticking out in the high mids, in the lows, whatever. And I use broad Q settings to boost, to change the overall tone of something. So for instance, let's say we have an electric guitar. Electric guitars, distorted, rocky electric guitars, usually have some resonances. Usually at 3-4K, this has to do with the whole physiology of the speakers and how the electronics are designed in all of these guitars and speakers and amplifiers. So usually at 3.1K, something like that, there's a resonance, which is a really narrow, harsh resonance. So this I can hear, and it's usually like this kind of sound, and it's very narrow. So I use a narrow EQ to kind of isolate it. First I boost a little bit, I isolate the problem. It is usually around 3.1. Then I hear, okay, this is it, and then I cut it out. And it's usually a really narrow Q, like on a FEP filter you'd be something like a 5 or 10 or something like that. But then the same guitar can also be dark. So I don't want to use, when I boost, I don't want to use narrow settings, narrow Q settings, because I don't want just one spike, just one area of this guitar to be brightened. So if I want to make something brighter, I'll use a wide Q setting, something really wide, to make the whole area above, let's say, 5 kilohertz much brighter. Same kind of philosophy I apply on kick drums, for instance. If I hear that the kick drum is lacking attack, so the clicky kind of sound, then I will not boost only a very narrow range around, let's say, 3, 5 or 8 kilohertz, because what that does, it will make the attack very narrow. So on a speaker that has a pronounced 5 kilohertz range, if I boost this 5 kilohertz on the attack, then it will be very, very pronounced. Yet at the same time, on a speaker where this range is recessed a little bit, the kick will suddenly lose its attack. So for me, I have a strong point in boosting quite broadly on a kick instrument as well, to boost a wide range around the attack, so that that attack of the kick is audible on multiple speaker systems, not just on, you know, like NS10s or whatever you've got. Let's stick to the kick. Kicks usually have resonances around 150 to 300 hertz area, sometimes 500, but this is just something you have to hear. You have to evaluate the problem, you have to listen to the kick and think, what is bothering me? Again, I talk about this in a later video, that mixing is just a game of problem, reaction, solution. So we identify a problem, we react how we don't like it, and now how do I solve it? So if a kick is muddy, then I know, okay, mud, 200 hertz to 300 hertz usually. Let's investigate that region. So first let's boost it. Does the problem get worse? Okay, cool, we are in the right area. Now let's cut it. And I usually use a narrow cut, but you can play around with it. You'll hear that when you cut too widely, that the whole sound of the kick just disappears. So you have to adjust it. You have to adjust the Q in a way where the problem disappears, but you're not affecting the good stuff, you know? And I think maybe this is the most simple way to put it. Set your Q settings to set your Q settings so that you solve the problem, but don't damage the sound, okay? So if you want a little bit more punch on the kick, then boost a little bit of 80 with a relatively narrow settings. But if you boost too wide, then you're boosting also 200 and 300 hertz. You're not only adding the punch at 80, but you're also adding mud. So set your Q setting on this kick so that you boost only that punchy region around the 60 to 80 Hertz region or range. What else? Vocal. I always use really wide Qs on boosting the sound. So I use wide boosts for treble, I use wide boosts in the lows if I have to, but I usually use very narrow cuts. And it's the same philosophy that the problems that appear on these recordings are usually quite isolated. So it's a bit of harshness at whatever 5K, so I use a very narrow Q to reduce it. And you can just use a really wide Q just to experiment, and you'll see that the whole vocal disappears, the whole sound just disappears, so it's not good. So use a narrow Q to isolate this problem and only to treat this problem. Mud in the vocal, same thing, 2 to 500 Hertz, usually a narrow issue. Unless it's like really boomy, really badly recorded, then you want a low shelf to take off all of that low below like 200-300 Hertz, but that's I think a separate issue. And yeah, again, boosting, I use wide boosts to keep the tone intact. And I guess we can talk a little bit about EQs and how they work. Like if you take a Pultec EQ, I'm sure most of you will have a Pultec EQ from Waves or UAD or any of these manufacturers. They're usually really wide EQs, and they were used as tone shapers back in the day. And if you read up on them, it's like, oh, this is such a great tone shaping machine. Yes, because it's really wide. It's a really wide, broadly boosting EQ. And broad boosts, boosts, usually they shape the tone nicely because they don't affect one isolated region of the audio. They boost a wide range, and therefore the difference is not so piercing, that the change is not as obvious or isolated, I guess, but it's like a gentle, pleasant change of the whole tone of the instrument. For reduction, I use the SSL style EQs a lot because you have a Q setting that is extremely versatile. If something is well enough recorded, I use an SSL EQ for doing my cuts and my boosts, because the cut can be really narrow, the boost can be really wide, so it really works for me. If I have bigger issues, then I'll use a FAP filter, or the Infinity EQ from Slate is really amazing, that is now included in the bundle. So I use that to reduce really narrow issues that I have, which are usually these resonances, these physical anomalies in electric guitars, bass, drums, vocal, whatever it is. Other fun fact, SE microphones, they all have a design flaw, which is why every SE microphone that I've tried in my life has a really pronounced resonance at 5K. Not a big issue though, you just take an EQ, reduce that 5K resonance, and everything is good. But it's just somehow the capsule is designed in a way that it generates this resonance, which is quite interesting. What else? I think this answers the question. I hope it's helpful. This is video number 1. Super exciting. Very excited to be doing this. As you can probably see, I'm not very familiar in doing videos, but over time the quality will get better. The sound quality will get better. I'm ordering a mic, but I just really wanted to get things started, taking my first step. And I hope you find this really helpful. And I'll be doing a next video very soon and helping you with some other issues. Take care, guys. Happy mixing.